Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for coming to testify before this committee today. Your insights have been very, very helpful. Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, I'd like to start with you and talk to you a little bit about the Working Families Flexibility Act, which was introduced and passed in the House by Representative Roby.
Yeah.
I'm sponsoring the Senate companion bill on this side of the Capitol, and just wanted to talk to you about this for a minute. It's always been striking to me that federal law puts us in a position where we even need legislation like this. I mean, we start out with an understanding that the only people who are subject to the existing federal restrictions that make this legislation even necessary are those who are, number one, hourly as opposed to salaried, and number two, not government employees. And so people who are either salaried or who work for the government don't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. So those of us in those categories are able to, as circumstances may require, go to our children's school plays or games or whatever else we need to do during the day on one day of the week. If we need to work more later in the week to offset those hours, we do that, and sometimes we take that for granted. But it seems particularly unfair that we tell hourly employees who are not government workers that they don't have the same advantage. Can you identify any good public policy reason why we ought to be discriminating against hourly employees who are generally lower paid merely because they don't work for the government? Is there any good reason to do that?
There is no good reason to do that. And as I said in my testimony, it is unfair that upper-income workers have the advantage of comp time and lower-income workers do not. We should expand that advantage to all American workers. They should all be allowed the choice.
Right. I think it's important for all of us to remember that, whenever people have increased flexibility, they can live their lives better. So this is not just an economic issue. This has all sorts of social implications as well. And it's always been difficult to me how someone could be against this, how someone would want the government to continue to discriminate against hourly workers who are generally less well paid, and particularly those hourly workers who don't work for the government.
And it also takes away an option for employers, because employers can offer a benefit, you see, of comp time that enables them to compete. Just as 97% of employers pay above minimum wage, they have to pay more to retain talent. So allowing them to offer the option of comp time is a way to retain talent. And I've brought one of my young staff with me, Jarrett Meyer. He often works very late, working on our e-brief, and sometimes he wants a day off. He wants a day off to go see his family in Chicago. So I say, fine, Jarrett, take the day off. But if the law was to go through, I would not be permitted to give him that option.
Okay. I suppose that it has one benefit relative to government, in that it gives perhaps the government something of a competitive advantage in hiring workers, but that's probably not the kind of advantage we want to be giving government. I assume you wouldn't disagree with that.
That is correct. I don't think we need to give government any more advantages than it already has. Government workers have very, very low quit rates, and they are undoubtedly at a big advantage in many ways.
Thank you. And Ms. Gressler, in your testimony, you noted that several regulatory factors tend to add rigidity to the labor market, restricting job growth and labor flexibility. And some of these include licensing laws, dated labor laws, and general government micromanagement. I think there's an important corollary to this, which is that many workers may be drawn out of the formal economy and into the informal economy, as we might describe it. Could you speak to how these kinds of restrictions, those regulatory restrictions that I described, might do this, how they might encourage people to participate in the informal economy rather than the formal economy, and what kinds of public policy ramifications that might have?
Sure. licensure laws, regulations, all these things that drive up the cost to either starting a business, continuing to work if it's a new regulation that's come down and it's going to cost your company or you as an individual too much to implement that and, to keep profitable, then you're probably just going to go off on the side and say, well, I'm going to do this, on under the table, or I'll give you this service, but, I'm not going to report that. It's fairly easy for people who are their own employers to do that if they're not working for a large company receiving a W-2. And you see that in restaurants that don't want to pay a minimum wage. They might just say, okay, I can't afford to do this. In my hometown, there was an ice cream shop, and everybody knew everybody that works there is under the table because they can't afford to pay people the minimum wage. And so there are plenty of people that wanted to work there, and they were willing to accept lower than the minimum wage. But that all goes off the books. The company's not paying taxes, the individuals aren't, and so we're driving people into the informal economy, and that's reducing revenues.
So it's reducing revenue to the government. That hurts the government. How might it also?
It's hurt. I'm sorry.
How might, I see my time's expired. Let me just follow up on this one more point if I could. How might it also hurt the worker, separate and apart
Right.
from how it might hurt the government?
Right. When the worker's not part of the formal economy, they're not entitled to any of the benefits that are required of employers. They're not contributing payroll taxes, so that's not going towards Social Security. There's no record of that. They're not entitled to any benefits that employers are required to provide, and so they're left with really few protections from the government if they're working under the table.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's a great example of how many of these restrictions that are publicly touted as ways of protecting the little guy actually end up hurting the little guy. And men and women throughout America are often victims to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.